Are you lost, old-timer? The Historical Society meeting is back in town. The voice, sharp with the arrogant confidence of youth, cut through the biting wind. Sergeant Decker stood with his arms crossed, a smirk playing on his lips as he looked down at the old man kneeling in the snow. His buddy, another young sniper wrapped in state-of-the-art winter gear, snickered beside him. They were the kings of this frozen domain, a high-altitude military range where precision was religion, and their multi-thousand-dollar rifles were the sacred texts. The old man didn't even flinch. He just continued his methodical work, his gnarled, gloveless fingers moving with an unhurried grace that seemed to defy the sub-zero temperatures. He wore a faded flannel shirt over a thermal, a pair of worn canvas work pants, and an old wool watch cap pulled low over his gray hair. He looked more like a farmer who'd taken a wrong turn than someone who belonged on a live-fire range reserved for an elite Army sniper platoon. His rifle, laid out on a simple canvas roll, was the source of Decker's mockery. It was a relic. A heavy wooden stock, scarred and dark with age and oil, was mated to a thick, long barrel that had a strange, dull brownish finish. It wasn't the sleek, adjustable chassis systems or carbon fiber barrels they were used to. It looked, to Decker's dismissive eye, like a museum piece someone had tried to modernize and failed. "Seriously, Grandpa, what is that thing? Did you pull it off the wall at a Cracker Barrel?" Decker pressed, his voice louder now, playing to the small audience of his peers. "You're going to hurt yourself with that rusty pipe. This is a professional range. We're shooting at over a mile here, not plinking squirrels." The old man finally paused. He looked up, and for a moment his eyes met Decker's. They were a pale, washed-out blue, the color of a winter sky just before a storm, and they held a stillness that was profoundly unsettling. There was no anger, no embarrassment, just a quiet, patient assessment. He said nothing. He simply picked up a soft cloth and began wiping down the bolt of his rifle, each movement deliberate and economical. The lack of a response seemed to enrage Decker more than any retort could have. It was a dismissal, a quiet statement that the sergeant's words were as meaningless as the wind-whipping snowflakes across the firing line. From a short distance away, Corporal Finn watched the exchange, a knot of discomfort tightening in his gut. He was new to the platoon, still feeling his way around the established pecking order, and Decker was firmly at the top. Finn had laughed along at first, the easy camaraderie of shared mockery attempting shelter from the cold. But now, watching the old man, something felt wrong. It wasn't just the quiet dignity, though there was that in abundance. It was something else, something in the way he moved. Finn had been through enough training to recognize the difference between civilian awkwardness and practiced efficiency. The old man didn't waste a single motion. When he adjusted his position in the snow, he didn't flounder. He shifted his weight with the fluid precision of a man who had spent a lifetime making himself one with the ground. His posture wasn't slumped with age. It was a relaxed coil, every muscle at a state of patient readiness. Finn's eyes narrowed, scanning for details. The old man's boots were old, cracked leather, but they were impeccably maintained, the seams waterproofed with beeswax. Then Finn saw it. As the man reached for a small wooden ammo box, the cuff of his flannel shirt rode up his wrist just an inch. There, on the weathered skin, was a tattoo. It was faded, the lines blurred by sun and time, but the image was unmistakable to someone who had studied the history of the Special Operations community. It was the stylized phantom of a very specific, very quiet Joint Special Operations Command Task Force, a unit that didn't officially exist. Finn felt a jolt, as if the frozen ground had sent a static charge up his spine. That symbol wasn't something you got in a back-alley tattoo parlor. It was earned in places that never made the news, on missions that were spoken of only in whispers, if at all. He looked from the tattoo to the rusty rifle. The barrel wasn't rusted. He could see it clearly now. It was a matte Cerakote finish, a custom color designed to blend into high desert rock and scrub. It was meant to kill glare, to make the weapon disappear. The wooden stock, he now realized, was perfectly bedded to the action, a custom job of the highest order. This wasn't a relic. It was a purpose-built instrument of death, honed and perfected by a master. The humiliation, however, was far from over. Decker, oblivious to the subtle clues that had set Finn's mind racing, saw only an old man with a strange rifle who refused to acknowledge his superiority. He strode over and stood directly in front of him, blocking his view of the distant targets. "Look, I'm the range safety officer today, and I'm telling you that weapon is not safe for this firing line. The action is probably worn, the barrel is pitted, and God only knows what kind of hand loads you've cooked up in your basement." He gestured expansively to his own rifle, a gleaming marvel of modern engineering, the Barrett M-Rad. "This is what a real long-range system looks like. It costs more than your truck. It has a computer that tells me everything from wind drift and spin drift to the Coriolis effect. You see this?" He tapped his expensive scope. "This can see the future. What's yours do? Tell time?" The other snipers chuckled, their laughter carried away by the wind. The old man, Caleb, simply looked at the space Decker was occupying, his gaze unfocused, as if he were looking straight through the younger man at the mountains beyond. He reached into his wooden box and pulled out a single cartridge. It was massive, far larger than the 338 Lapua Magnum rounds Decker's team was using. He rolled it between his thumb and forefinger, a thoughtful, almost affectionate gesture. "Is there a problem, Sergeant?" Caleb's voice was quiet, raspy from disuse, but it carried a strange weight. It wasn't a challenge, it was a simple question. The use of his rank, however, seemed to set Decker off. "Yeah, there's a problem. The problem is you. This is a serious training exercise. We're qualifying for deployment. We don't have time for your little trip down memory lane, so pack up your junk and clear the firing line before I have the MPs escort you out." He pointed a gloved finger toward the road. It was the ultimate insult, a threat to have him removed like a common trespasser. Caleb's pale blue eyes finally focused on Decker, and the casual amusement in them was gone, replaced by something ancient and cold. He still didn't raise his voice. "I was cleared to be here." Just as Decker was about to unleash another tirade, the crunch of tires on frozen gravel announced a new arrival. A convoy of 3 black SUVs, looking starkly out of place against the white landscape, rolled to a stop behind the firing line. Soldiers snapped to attention. Doors opened, and out stepped a figure who commanded instant silence. He was tall, ramrod straight, with 2 stars glittering on the collar of his uniform. Major General Madsen. He was the commanding general of the entire division, a man whose reputation was forged in the fires of Fallujah and the mountains of Afghanistan. He was here to observe the platoon's capabilities with their new equipment. Decker's face went from a mask of arrogant fury to one of fawning subservience in a heartbeat. "General, on behalf of the platoon, welcome," he barked, his voice straining with forced enthusiasm. General Madsen gave him a curt nod, his gaze already sweeping across the range, taking in the soldiers, the equipment, the distant targets. His eyes were sharp, missing nothing. He walked the line, listening to the lead instructor explain the capabilities of the new systems. The platoon's best shooters, Decker included, began their demonstration. They sent rounds downrange with impressive accuracy, hitting steel targets at 1,500 meters, then 1,800. Each hit was confirmed by the spotters with a satisfying ping that echoed faintly back to the line. The general watched, his expression unreadable. He seemed less than impressed. It was all too clean, too clinical. The computers were doing half the work. He saw men operating equipment not masters of their craft. When the demonstration concluded, a confident silence settled over the range, the snipers expecting praise. The general didn't offer any. Instead, He raised a pair of powerful binoculars to his eyes and scanned the far horizon, past the standard targets. He focused on a distant, snow-dusted ridgeline that formed the very edge of the valley. "Sergeant," he said, his voice quiet but carrying the unmistakable weight of command. "What's the range to that communications repeater on Razorback Ridge?" The platoon's lead instructor fumbled with his laser rangefinder. "1 moment, sir." He squinted, trying to get a lock. "Having trouble getting a reading, sir. Too much atmospheric distortion. But based on the topographical maps, that's over 3,500 meters, sir. Well over 2 miles. The general nodded slowly, never lowering his binoculars. On the ridge, almost invisible to the naked eye, was a small, orange service panel, no bigger than a dinner plate, bolted to the side of the repeater tower. Our intelligence suggests that a position like that could be used by enemy observers to monitor our movements in this entire valley. With the right equipment, they could call in artillery or direct an ambush. It's an unacceptable threat. He lowered the binoculars and looked at the assembled snipers. "Can any of your new wonder weapons neutralize a target that small at that range?" A nervous silence fell over the platoon. The instructor cleared his throat. "Sir, with all due respect, that's an impossible shot. The ballistics are extreme. At that distance, the bullet would be in the air for almost 8 seconds. We'd have to account for wind vectors at multiple altitudes, Magnus effect, the spin of the Earth. Our equipment isn't rated for that kind of engagement. It's beyond the realm of possibility." The air crackled with the unspoken admission of failure. The expensive new systems had a limit, and the general had found it in less than 10 minutes. Decker, feeling the heat of the general's unblinking stare, saw an opportunity to deflect the pressure and, in his mind, land a final, crushing blow on the old man. A cruel, dismissive smirk returned to his face. "Well, sir," he said, his voice dripping with false sincerity as he gestured dramatically toward Caleb, who was still kneeling quietly off to the side. "Maybe the old-timer and his musket want to give it a try. He seems to think he's got what it takes." A few of the younger snipers tittered nervously. It was a shockingly disrespectful gamble, but Decker was desperate. He expected the general to laugh it off, to dismiss the old man and return to the matter at hand. But General Madsen didn't laugh. His head turned slowly, his gaze falling upon Caleb and the strange, old rifle. He looked at the man, then at the weapon, then back at the man. His eyes, as sharp as a hawk's, lingered on the faded tattoo on Caleb's wrist, which was now clearly visible. A flicker of something, recognition, awe, a deep and profound respect crossed the general's stern features. He studied Caleb for a long, silent moment, the entire range holding its breath. The snickering died instantly. The general's focus was so intense it was as if the two men were the only people on the mountain. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and firm, not to Decker, but to Caleb. "The range is hot. You are cleared to fire when ready." Decker's jaw went slack. He stared at the general, then at Caleb, his mind unable to process what was happening. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. The general had just sanctioned the joke. He had called his bluff. The impossible had just been authorized. Every eye on the mountain was now fixed on the old man. The air was thick with a mixture of disbelief and morbid curiosity. The platoon of elite snipers with their futuristic weapons and ballistic computers looked on as the man in the faded flannel shirt prepared to attempt a shot they had just declared impossible. Corporal Finn felt his heart pounding against his ribs. He wasn't watching a joke anymore. He was witnessing a ritual. Caleb moved with the same unhurried deliberation as before, completely insulated from the pressure of his audience. He reached into his worn leather pouch and produced not a modern Kestrel wind meter but a small, frayed length of yarn. He tossed it into the air, watching its path with an intensity that was almost frightening. He didn't just see the wind. He seemed to feel it, to understand its invisible currents and eddies. He glanced at the subtle sway of a distant pine bough, at the way the snowflakes danced and spun in the air 1,000 yards down range. He was reading the mountain itself. He lay down in the snow, settling his body into the ground until he looked like a natural feature of the landscape. He adjusted the bipod, then pulled the rifle stock into his shoulder. It was a perfect, seamless union of man and machine. He reached for the elevation turret on his ancient-looking scope. It wasn't a modern tactical turret with crisp clicks. It was a large, custom-made dial with fine, hand-scribed markings. He turned it slowly, his eyes closed, as if counting the clicks by feel alone. Finn recognized the intense concentration, the total exclusion of all external stimuli. It was the same hyper-focused state their instructors called the bubble. But this was deeper, more absolute than anything Finn had ever seen. The old man was gone. In his place was simply the firing solution, a human calculator processing 1,000 variables of wind, temperature, humidity, and barometric pressure with an instinct born of a lifetime of practice. Caleb opened his eyes. The world had gone silent. The mocking faces of the young snipers, the imposing figure of the general, the biting cold, it all faded away into a gray periphery. All that existed was the reticle, his breathing, and the impossibly distant target. The crosshairs of the old Unertal-style scope settled on the ridge. Through the powerful but clear glass, he could just make out the tiny orange square. His mind flashed back, an involuntary spasm of memory. A different mountain range, the jagged peaks of the Hindu Kush, the air thin and scorching hot, the taste of copper in his mouth. Not an orange panel, but the glint of a sniper scope 3,000 meters away aimed at a group of green berets moving through a valley below. The same impossible shot, the same weight of life and death resting on the gentle squeeze of his trigger finger. He let the memory fade. He took a breath, let half of it out, and found the natural respiratory pause. His heart beat a slow, steady rhythm. Boom, boom, boom. He waited for the space between the beats, that fleeting moment of perfect stillness. He pressed the trigger. The rifle didn't crack like the modern .338s. It boomed, a deep, thunderous roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the mountain. The recoil pushed him back, a familiar and comforting shove. The massive .408 Chaitak bullet, a hand-loaded solid brass projectile he had machined himself, left the barrel at over 3,000 feet per second, beginning its long, lonely journey across the valley. He didn't break his position. He stayed locked behind the scope, his eye still pressed to the glass, watching for the vapor trail, watching for the splash. Silence. A profound, ringing silence descended upon the range, broken only by the whisper of the wind. Everyone stared through their optics, their binoculars, their naked eyes at the distant, hazy ridge. 7 seconds. 8 seconds. An eternity. Decker had a triumphant smirk on his face, ready to declare the inevitable miss. Corporal Finn held his breath until his lungs burned. The general's spotter, a master sergeant using a spotting scope powerful enough to read a newspaper a mile away, suddenly stiffened. He blinked, then leaned into the eyepiece again, his knuckles white. He turned away from the scope, his face pale with disbelief. He looked at the general and spoke in a choked whisper that somehow carried across the entire firing line. "Hit!" He cleared his throat and spoke louder, his voice cracking with awe. "Direct hit. Surya, the target is gone. The panel is... it's completely shattered." A collective gasp went through the platoon. Binoculars and scopes swiveled back and forth from the empty space on the repeater tower to the old man still lying motionless in the snow. It was impossible. It was a miracle. It was an act of God executed with a rifle. Decker's face had gone slack, his mouth hanging open. The color had drained from his cheeks, leaving him looking pale and sick. The world he understood, a world of technology, data, and predictable outcomes, had just been shattered by a man he had dismissed as a relic, Slowly, Caleb broke his position. He worked the bolt, ejecting the spent casing, which landed with a soft hiss in the snow. He began to calmly clean his rifle, his movements as unhurried as they had been all morning. It was as if he had just shot at a tin can 50 feet away. The general walked over to him. His boots made no sound in the deep snow. He stopped directly in front of the kneeling old man. The entire command staff, the platoon of elite snipers, the instructors, they all watched, waiting for the general's verdict. General Madsen did not speak. He simply stood there for a moment, his gaze fixed on Caleb. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he brought his right hand up in a perfect textbook salute. It wasn't the quick, perfunctory gesture of a superior officer. It was the slow, reverent salute of a soldier honoring a legend. He held it, his eyes locked on Caleb's. The other officers on the line, confused but bound by duty, followed their commander's lead. One by one they saluted. Soon, the entire command element, from the colonels to the majors, were standing at attention, saluting the old man in the flannel shirt. Decker and the other snipers stood frozen, their arrogance replaced by a wave of cold, dawning shame. Finally, the general lowered his hand. He looked not at Caleb, but at the stunned faces of Decker and his men. His voice was low, but it resonated with an authority that was absolute. You men have the finest equipment money can buy. You have computers that do your thinking for you. And you have arrogance. What you lack is humility. What you lack is a true understanding of your craft. He gestured with his chin toward Caleb. This man is Master Gunnery Sergeant Caleb Hale, retired, from a unit you will never read about. In the places you see in your nightmares, they called him the Ghost. Because the only way you knew he was there was when the man next to you fell down dead from 2 ridgelines away. The general paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. He holds the longest confirmed kill in the history of the Joint Special Operations Command. A shot taken under extreme duress at a verified distance of over 2 miles. A shot that saved the lives of 17 American soldiers. A shot so secret, it was buried in a classified after-action report that only 3 people in this country have ever read. I was one of them. He didn't use a computer. He used his mind, his heart, and a rifle he built with his own 2 hands. He turned back to Caleb, his hard features softening. It's good to see you, Caleb. The rifle still sings a beautiful song. Caleb finally looked up, a faint, sad smile touching his lips. He nodded. She still remembers the notes, General? He finished wiping down his weapon and began to pack it away. Corporal Finn, his heart full of a respect so profound it felt like a physical weight, walked over. He didn't know what to say. He just unscrewed the cap from his own thermos and held it out. Coffee, Master Guns? Caleb looked at the young corporal, his pale blue eyes seeing not just a soldier, but the future. He took the offered cup. Thank you, son, he said, his voice quiet but clear. Thank you. The snow fell silently around them, blanketing the range in a pristine white, covering the footprints of arrogance and leaving only the quiet dignity of a master in his craft.